Hi guys, today we're going to work with charcoal, either in our sketchbooks, which is fine, or preferably with the drawing paper that I just gave you. So we're gonna start out by drawing with this pencil, but first let me introduce your supplies. So you should have in it your supplies from last semester, 3 orange pencils. One says medium, one says soft, and one says extra soft. So make sure all of those are good and sharpened. You also are going to grab your erasers. I like to use the kneaded eraser, which is the most important, and I also have a secondary one. And I have a pencil sharpener just nearby, so whenever my pencil gets dull or breaks, that it's there. We're going to be using a ruler today to help us set up. And so let me get up to the top here, and I'm just taking my regular pencil. It can be your ones that I gave you, or just, a pencil that you have from home. And we're going to label this charcoal practice, again, in our sketchbooks or on one of those nicer sheets of paper that I gave you. Either way works. So date up at the top, and then we're going to take our rulers. Remember, we're going to start at the 0, and we're going to go all the way to the 7-inch mark. So start at 0 and draw a line to 7. We're going to start by making a value scale, and I'm going to mark it at every inch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Then I'm going to go an inch down. It doesn't super matter, but just kind of helps us. So again, start at the 0, mark down 1 inch. Do that on both sides so it's even on both sides. And then I will finish out that bar. So start with the horizontal line, use your ruler for that, line up those dots. And from this point, I don't really need my ruler. I'll just try my best to make straight lines. You can use the ruler if you want to. But I'm going to close all of these little value scales with my pencil. Doesn't have to be perfect. So I'm going to do 0% value at the end, 50 at the middle, and I'm going to start with 100% value, so fully filled out, and then until it's completely empty. We're going to do the same with a gradient. So the top is a value scale and the bottom is a gradient. So same thing, just a 7-inch bar, so it looks very similar. Mark the bottoms, and then I'm just going to guesstimate what 1 inch going lower looks like, and I'll close that out. Okay, so we want to mark in that on the left we are going to start with low value, and on the right side we're going to go to high value. So remember, low is dark and high is light, so we're going to have it start dark and then fade into our high value. So next what we want to do is grab something circular, and we're going to make a sphere on the bottom part of our paper. So I'm going to take this tape roll and go along the outside of it, just trace that real quick. So find something that's circular shaped, or you can freehand that if you'd like to. I'm going to have my light source come in from the left side. That's just easier for me because I'm right-handed. Again, I'm going to mark the bottom and then draw a diagonal ellipse, a diagonal oval, and erase any of the excess. So anything that would get blocked off by the circle, I'll erase, and I'll just lighten the whole thing. So you'll see me do that to the top too. So I'm going to lighten out my graphite because graphite and charcoal don't technically really get along. So now that's all light. And I'm going to go in with my pencils now. So I'm going to start with the soft one. That's just what I prefer. You can also do the medium. I would not suggest you go in with your extra soft. So this is the soft pencil. I'm going to go and fill out my very first 100% box. I like to outline it first so I know where I have to keep my shading within. And for this particular box, you're going to fill it as much as possible till it's completely black. So right now you can see a bunch of speckles from the page, but we don't technically want those. We want to get in really, really dark. So I'll go over it a couple of times, but it really won't quite get in the cracks of my paper. So what I do at this point is I actually have my blending stick tool. So you should have received one of those, and if you didn't, doesn't really matter. I just use a paper towel. It's basically like a paper towel like rolled up, and it's a lot thinner than my hands or my fingers are, so I will use like the tip of that to try and push my charcoal into those little cracks. So that way it's completely covered as best as I can, and it's not super messy as I do that. Again, a paper towel always will work, so you just have to bring it to a fine point and do your best to stay within the lines as you do that. Sometimes that lightens it a little bit, so you might have to go over it one more time. We're not trying to brush off the charcoal because then it'll smear, so you are going to like take a breath to it. And I'll just go over that one more time to make sure it's extra dark. And now that I've finished my first box, I can start working on my next one. Again, we're getting a little bit lighter as we move along. So with this one, still using either the medium or the soft brush. Right now I'm in the medium one. It just gives me more control because it's a harder brush. So it's not going to dull out quite as easily, and it'll stay kind of sharper and easier to do lighter values. So if I get to this point, you can choose whether or not you want to smudge it in. So you can take your paper towel to it. Because it's already very dark and it looks black, it might look exactly like the first one that you had. So you are going to have to be careful about that. If it gets too dark, then we can fix it. Right now they look really, really similar to me. So I'm going to take my kneaded eraser, and you notice that I'm just kind of patting it. I'm not like rubbing the eraser in there, but I'm kind of stamping the gray kneaded eraser to lighten up my my charcoal there. And then the eraser gets kind of black, so you'll have to knead it, so you'll like use it like dough to clean that. I'll use the other eraser just to clean up the edges. Again, I don't really like the shreds too much because that means I have to swipe my paper more, so be careful when you do that. And we're going to keep going and just get lighter and lighter as we do this. And again, I'm suggesting you use your medium pencil. I like to start with really light kind of layers and just keep laying on value on top of that, so you see me go over things a couple of times. And I really just build on that. I'm going to avoid using the paper towel for a couple of rounds. And I'm just going to go in with the actual pencil itself. Again, you want to have good control of your pencil without having to rely too much on paper towels or blending. So charcoal is notoriously difficult to control. Try to sharpen up your lines like you see me doing there. And if you notice something needs to adjust, get lighter, get darker, then you can absolutely do that. I'll try to save using my eraser until the end. And that second to last box is going to be your lightest. In the 0%, we're going to leave it alone, so nothing needs to go in there. Try to have all of your boxes look very different from each other. We'll take the paper towel, and we have used it a couple of times, so it's kind of dark. You can start either from this side on the left, and again, very lightly kind of sweep over it. Or what you can do instead is you can go to a clean spot on your paper towel and actually start from the lighter parts, because the paper towel does get darker as it moves on. So start with the light box and then just move more towards the darker end. Then you don't have to worry about cleaning it out every time. Sometimes I'll even take a little bit of the older, like darker ones, and use that to help kind of smooth things out. So again, I'm not super concerned about staying within like the top and bottom lines, because I can take this eraser and just clean it out, being very careful about swiping all that away because I don't want to smudge too much. So very clean. Swipe away and done. Next here, we are going to work on the gradient. Remember, a gradient starts really dark and then eventually fades away. So I'm, again, using either the soft or medium brush, and I'm going to start by layering the back end of it, so the lower end. And I use these twisted kind of tornado shapes that you can see here. And I kind of lift off. So you see I haven't gotten very far, but I'm adding more and more layers as we go on. With this one, you want it to look like a very smooth transition. So up at the top, we wanted different boxes. Here, we don't want that box. We want that like eventual slow and smooth gradient look. And for this one, I'm actually not going to be blending with my paper towel. You can decide if you would like to and you want to experiment with that, but I really want this gradient to just look like I've been able to control my values. So the eraser will help lighten things, but it's up to me to cover them as evenly as possible. So I'll go in here, really extend that dark area so it looks a little bit more like the top does. It's not gonna quite end up the same, but I want it to have similar values to the top. And just bring that down. Again, I go in these twisted shapes to make it the most even as possible so you don't see these kind of individual lines, but you get the sense that it's an area that fades away, not lines that create that. So build up your values. It can be nice and slow. Really work with your hand and make sure that you feel like you're in control. Towards the end here, I am taking the side of my pencil and just kind of brushing it over to the end to extend that kind of middle value. And make sure that the very end of this is like as black as it can be. We don't want too big of a white area. We just want to fade it into that white. And you will probably need to take your kneaded eraser, just kind of pat it down. And there you go. That is how to do a gradient. Paper towel optional if you want to try it. Again, just start from the high value and then go to the low. Now we're going to start working on our sphere. So for this, all of my pencils are ready, looking nice and sharp. We are going to use the extra soft one at the end there. And you can decide again between the soft and medium. I prefer the soft. I just think it has more of a range. So that initial curve that I made is kind of like the moon shape that we are going to bring our core shadow around. So I have my little arrow up at the top telling me where the light source is, and we're building around our eventual highlight. So as usual, I like to start there. I'm not going to draw an outline around my highlight, but it's kind of like I'm doing my gradient. It's just going to be bent in a different way, so around a sphere. You should have in your sketchbooks a good example of a sphere that we did earlier. And there should be a sample up for you on Canvas of what that should look like anyways. So notice that it's getting dark kind of towards the bottom. Again, it looks kind of like a crescent moon or like a smile. It's not right down the middle, but it's a little bit angled. So make sure that you're showing that angle off. And see that my bottom part of this is still blank. So I haven't quite gotten all the way through yet. I'm really going to make sure that my core shadow gets like really, really dark. I'm not trying to like grind my pencil in so that it becomes black, but I'm slowly letting the layers become darker and darker. And now I'm going to extend that out so it roughly hits into my edges. For this, I'm planning on taking my paper towel, so I can do kind of like a cross-hatching technique. So remember when we did ink, we were looking at cross-hatching and that involved a lot of lines. Eventually I'll smooth out those lines, so it should be fine as long as I'm using the side of my pencil to do this. So not the very tip of it, but I'm going to go around my edges, be really careful to basically avoid and fade into where I think the highlight should be. So you'll see some rough lines there. Notice that I'm curving them, that I'm not keeping these lines like super straight. And you see my arm and my wrist kind of moving everywhere. I'm not putting my hand down on the actual sphere because I don't want to smudge it with my hand. So you do have to be careful about that. Some people put a piece of paper under their hand to avoid that side of your palm getting really messy. I'm pretty good at floating my hand up and I have that amount of control, but if you don't, then put your hand on something or put a piece of paper where you're not working. Okay. Try to stay within the lines as best as you can. Again, you want that center of that to be the darkest. So if it's starting to not look that way, then be careful. And again, you're using the side of your pencil, not the very edge of it. And you'll see me kind of draw that in. So by using the side, we have these kind of thicker marks. If you use the tip, it'll be thin. If you use the side, it'll be a lot softer and it'll fill out more. So that's why you see me using that. Okay, so now I'm ready to blend. I'm going to take my eraser to extend my highlight. It's already kind of fading if I use my kneaded eraser to lighten it. You can use your paper towel or your hand. You see it gets very messy, so you're going to kind of clean your hand out. We essentially just don't want any oil. And then I'm going to take my fingers similar to my paper towel and I'm going to try and blend that as best as I can. It's easier to kind of control your finger and how well you apply the pressure, how hard you apply the pressure of this. We're not pressing very hard, but we're just trying to blend things so that they look more smooth, a little bit more even, while retaining that kind of charcoal texture. To make this better, I'm going to take my extra soft pencil now because that one moves the most. It'll smudge the most, so it'll make really smooth things. It'll also be the darkest, so I'll just put that in where the core shadow is, and then I'll blend that with my finger. After I do that, I can extend that out more. Again, you can use a combination of your finger and a paper towel, which are just like different techniques that you can use to make this look the best that it can. But I think starting this way has the most control as long as your fingers aren't super dirty. Now I can take my eraser and kind of clean up the edges. So I'm taking my kneaded eraser. Again, I like kneaded it first so it's not completely black, so a nice gray part is showing. And I shape it so that it's nice and sharp, and there we go. I don't want my eraser to be very melty, so if you're the type of person who plays with it, you have to be careful that you leave it alone for a while. So my circle is looking pretty good. There's some areas that I think I'd like to adjust now. So after I take my eraser, I'm going to go in with my pencil again. This time the medium one, which has more control. And I'll fill out any areas that don't look quite right. And now I'll take my paper towel. And I can use it very lightly to make this look a lot smoother. So I don't see any of that kind of scratchy quality. But again, you have to be very light with it, especially in the light areas. Now I'm going and just putting some preliminary shadow down. So I didn't use my pencils for that. I just used whatever was left over on my paper towel. I will have to go in and right under the sphere, I will have it be really dark. Then I'll fade it out. I use the extra soft for that. And then again, I'll take my paper towel and blend that so it looks a little bit neater and has a better kind of faded texture to it. Again, erase anything to kind of clean up all the edges. And I use my kneaded eraser since it doesn't have any like little shreddies that I have to wipe away. And back with my paper towel. And I think that looks pretty nice and clean now. So at this point, I'm going to add a little bit of a background to this. So mark in your lines. You can use your ruler for that. And I'm just taking my pencil and going around the actual object, but also in the background. So I don't want my actual object to have an outline. I'm going to extend that outwards. And I'm doing this very roughly because I'm planning on taking my paper towel like this. Go around very carefully as to not smudge inside of the ball, otherwise I'm going to have to rework some stuff, erase and try again. But just a rough background to give this a little bit of context. And that should be good.